Welcome back to Musings from the Mountains here on WVSports.com. My name is Zach Anderson alongside Keenan Cummings, and we have a special guest today from the Panther Insider, Chris Peak. Chris, we're thankful to have you today to talk a little bit about the Pitt matchup. It's the 106th matchup of the Backyard Brawl coming up this Saturday, and we have lots of stuff to get to. So first of all, I want to ask, what do you expect from Pitt in this game, and what have you seen so far in the season that's been impressive, not so impressive? Just give me your basic thoughts on what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a weird place right now. They're coming off a loss to Cincinnati, Big 12 member Cincinnati. We got to remember that wasn't a G5 loss. That was a Power 5 loss. Yeah. But, they're coming off a loss to Cincinnati. They opened the season against Wofford. They did to Wofford what you should do to Wofford if you're a Power 5 team. And then they play Cincinnati. They get gashed by the run game in the first half. Cincinnati rushed for 180 yards in the first half, and they're just sort of bludgeoned by it. They're down 20-7 at halftime. They end up battling back, and they lose 27-21. But Phil Dracovic, their quarterback, who transferred from Notre Dame to Boston College and then to Pitt, completed 10 of 32 in the game. He completed 4 passes in the first half. Just really looked out of sync with his receivers, inaccurate. The ball was all over the place, and it just nothing was really working. But then among his 10 completions, he had 3 touchdowns that were actually kind of good. So you're like, wow, you're 10 of 32, which is, objectively bad, but you actually made some really nice touchdown passes. So it's what's going on there? They really didn't run the ball much. I mean, Pat Narduzzi is a dedicated believer in running the ball and time of possession and all of that. The 3 running backs combined for 18 carries in the game. Despite, and I don't think it has to do with the fact that they were losing. It was a weird game like that. Pat Narduzzi's defenses are built to stop the run. They never get gashed for 200 yards, except for the West Virginia game last year. But that was actually kind of interesting. West Virginia had, I think, 190 rushing yards, but that was with like minus 23 from JT Daniels. So effectively, the Mountaineers went over 200 last year against Pitt. The next week, they came out and held Tennessee under 100 total, and Tennessee ended up being like a top 30 rushing offense. So I think they're counting on the same kind of week-to-week improvements that we saw last year, where they actually figure out some of the details, get the fits down and all of that. And then they need their quarterback and their receivers to just be on the same page. So, I mean, there's a lot, there are a lot of question marks heading into this. There's a lot of things we don't know, because even though it's week 3 and it's their 3rd game, it sort of feels like the second game, because that first one was Wofford, right? It just doesn't, coaches always say you make your biggest improvement week 1 to week 2. This feels like a week 1 to week 2 transition. And it's going to be really interesting to see what Pitt's got when they come out here.
You mentioned Jurgovic. Where is he? Is he the guy that played against Wofford? Is he the guy that played against Cincinnati? I mean, obviously, I talked to Jim for our article we do every week, and he said, obviously, he hasn't played as well as people thought he would through the first 2 games. But where do you think the disconnect is? Is it simply just not being on the page with his wide receivers?
Yeah, a little bit. The thing with him, he was a 4-star guy. He's originally from Western Pennsylvania. And even coming out of high school, he was this big kid who could run and had a big arm. And he was almost, and it's weird, it's such a dorky comparison to make around here, but he had some sort of like Roethlisberger esqueness, some Roethlisberger to his game in terms of being this big quarterback. He was hard to get down, and he could kind of run better than you expect a guy who's like 245 or 250 to run, which is how big he is. But he had this big arm, but he wasn't always accurate. And so he goes to Notre Dame, doesn't really play, goes to Boston College, plays for 3 years. And his best year was 2020 when Frank Cignetti was his offensive coordinator. Well, Cignetti's now the coordinator at Pitt. And so the hope was that putting these 2 guys together, familiarity with the offense, that it would all really work. But it really didn't work on Saturday. And if you watch, particularly in the 4th quarter, but really throughout the game, some of the plays from that game, some of the passing plays, some of the throws he made, particularly to number 0, Bub Means. I mean, you would think that they were not just not on the same pages, they weren't even in the same book. I mean, there are plays where I don't know if it was supposed to be a comeback, but the ball sails into the stands. It looks like it's going into the stands, and Bub Means is still running straight up the field. And you're just like, what is going on? This is a disaster. And then there were plays the receivers could have made that they didn't fully catch the ball. Pat Narduzzi had a quote this week where he said, that first game against, basically real competition gives you a chance to find out where your problems really are, where your holes really are. You're not going to find that out against Wofford. You're not going to find it out against Duquesne, but you'll find out in that real game. I think West Virginia probably saw some of it against Penn State, and Pitt definitely did against Cincinnati, of finding some of their issues. And I think it applies to both sides of the ball. And so I'm looking for both sides to be better, but it's going to be about Dracovic being a little more accurate and his receivers making some better plays. Somebody was wrong, on those plays. The coaches have to figure out who it was and how they're going to get them right.
So you guys lost
Offensively,
us.
Chris.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Offensively, is this Pitt team similar to last year? I know they've had some turnover. They've lost some players. Is it a similar offense? Do they want to attack differently? Who are the people to watch on offense for this team?
Yeah, I think the basic idea is the same. I mean, it's still the same offensive coordinator, still the same head coach. They've had turnover at quarterback, with Dracovic coming in. They got a couple new receivers. They lost some receivers. So it's the same basic idea. They want to run the ball. They want to set up play action and try and take shots that way. They're going to try and get the tight ends involved a little bit more than they were last year, because it was sort of it was pretty embarrassing how they didn't throw to the tight ends last season. So they're going to try and get more out of those guys. It's the same basic ideas, though. It's like I say, it's a power running game, and it's supposed to be a power running game, and it's play action working off of that power running game. You're not going to see a lot of, I'll say this and then they'll do it like 15 times. You're not going to see a lot of like RPOs. You're not going to see a lot of spread and the wide splits in the offensive line and things like that. It's going to be a power pro style offense that tries to establish the run. And that was the weird thing about the Cincinnati game. They got the ball first and came out, went 3 and out with 3 incomplete passes. And it's like, what are you doing? Hand the ball off. This is what you're supposed to do. And so they don't have Israel Banakanda, who's with the Jets now. He was their big running back last year. They have Rodney Hammond, who actually got hurt in the West Virginia game last year, but is a really good player. He'll probably be the primary back. Bub Means, like I mentioned, Zero is a big, fast wide receiver who needs to be a little more consistent as an actual receiver, not just a really good athlete. Kanate Mumfield, number 9, is a really good receiver. And then the tight end, 86, Gavin Bartholomew, is a really good player. He had a 60-yard catch against Cincinnati. Last year, he had a even longer touchdown catch where he jumped over a Tennessee defender, did like the hurdle thing. This is a tight end from Eastern PA. There aren't a lot of tight ends from Eastern PA who are jumping over guys, but he did that. So he's a pretty special player. Those are the main guys, and then Dracovic, and I think he's going to make some plays with his legs. He had a 14-yard run last week against Cincinnati, ran for a touchdown against Wofford as well. And so he's always kind of a threat when the play breaks down or if he sees something open to take off. But he's also a threat just when the pocket collapses to get out of trouble, to shed a tackle and get outside and keep his eyes downfield. So they've got some players. They just got to figure out what it is they want to do.
So to flip over to the defensive side of the ball, you lose Kalijah Cansey. So now what's the identity for the defense, you think? What have you seen so far? I mean, you only allowed 27 points to Cincinnati, so not a terrible defensive game, but I want to know what you've seen so far from that group.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine Pat Narduzzi was happy. I mean, 180 rushing yards in the first half. They ended up only giving up 216, so they held him to 36 yards in the second half on the ground. But Pat Narduzzi had to be pulling whatever hairs he has left out after giving up 180 in the first half. I mean, that's the antithesis of Pat Narduzzi football. It starts with stopping the run. And then their pass defense, I mean, it's basically the same defense they've had since Narduzzi arrived. Randy Bates is the defensive coordinator. He's been there for a few years, but it's Pat Narduzzi's defense, the one he had at Michigan State, where it's a 4-3 front. It's press quarters on the outside. The corners are going to get up in the receiver's face and disrupt their timing. The safeties are going to play 7 and 8 yards off the line of scrimmage to try and stop the run. And they're going to try and be aggressive. The whole idea is stop the run, and then when they drop back to pass, disrupt their timing with, jamming guys and being physical on the outside and getting home and forcing bad decisions with the pass rush. Now, it was one thing to force bad decisions with the pass rush in 2020 when they had Rashad Weaver and Patrick Jones at DN. They were both All-Americans, or last year, Kalijah Cansey's a first-round draft pick at defensive tackle. They haven't shown that they have that kind of pass rushing presence yet. The DNs are all kind of new. The tackles are a bunch of 6-year guys who haven't really produced much. And we're sort of like spoiled around here, like Kalijah Cansey, All-American pass rushing defensive tackle. Jalen Twyman in 2019 had like 12 and a half sacks. Like obviously Aaron Donald in 2012, 2013. We've had, Pitt has had a lot of these smaller pass rushing defensive tackles. And so I think we've sort of forgotten in a 4-3 defense what a defensive tackle usually does. Like that's not the standard, but I think people around Pitt have come to expect it because they've just been churning these guys out. They haven't shown yet that they have that guy. I think they have a few younger players, a freshman and a sophomore, who could be that guy. I just don't know if it's going to happen this season. So they're still trying to figure out their pass rush and where it's going to come from. But otherwise it's largely the same defense, same one that West Virginia faced last year, and same one that basically Pitt has been playing for about 9 years now.
Chris, any injuries or any guys of concern for Pitt? And also kind of what do you think the keys are if Pitt wants to come down and win in Morgantown?
Yeah, they're pretty healthy right now. They haven't really had much. They lost their starting left guard, but before the season started, they've one of the younger defensive tackles that I mentioned. He missed the first 2 games so far. He's kind of up in the air about when he's going to be on the field. But that's it. They're pretty healthy. As far as keys to the game, I mean, I think so much of it's going to be the running game, whether Pitt can run and whether Pitt can stop the run. And I almost sort of feel like whichever one of these teams, no disrespect to Garrett Green and Phil Dracovic, but I mean, I kind of feel like whichever one of these teams can get the run game going and really sort of establish that is probably going to be the one that wins here. I mean, West Virginia very well could have and maybe even should have won that game last year, and it was largely on the strength of getting, I know Donaldson only had 7 carries, but I mean, that really sort of changed the tenor of the game that they were able to establish the run like that. If West Virginia can establish the run this week, like Cincinnati did last week, I mean, I would expect the Mountaineers to win, but if Pitt has sort of shored things up in that regard and they can stop the run, I think they're going to be in pretty good shape. Obviously there's a lot of question marks about Pitt's quarterback, but to me, it'll come down to that. I would imagine the team that has, the better rushing numbers in this game is probably going to be the team that wins.
So what do you think it takes sorry, Keenan.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. I just had a quick question about the environment on Saturday, because what has Pitt done to prepare for that environment, and what do you expect them to have to do to really perform in it?
Yeah, I mean, they're practicing with noise like everybody does. I walked past their practice field this week, and I mean, they have the noise going loud so they can work on that communication and whatnot. To be honest, like last week, as Phil Dracovic was in midst of, a 4 of 13 first half and a 10 of 32 game, and I mean, they have, crucial 3rd down, 4th down play late in the game. They're inside the 30 with a chance to go for a, go ahead touchdown, and he's missing receivers by 10 yards. He was getting booed. He's getting booed at home, which is what fans do. There's part of me that thinks it might actually be better to get away from home, because actually after the game, he was asked about the boos. And I don't know if you guys saw this comment. I apologize if this is a family program, but he said, if you're a grown ass man in the stadium booing, that's pathetic. I think you need to take a look at yourself. So he didn't win any friends that way either. So I think if this game was at home and his first pass was incomplete, he would get booed even more. He might even get booed before he even throws a pass. Partially because of his poor performance last week and partially because of the comments he made after the game. So I'm kind of the mind that it's better get out, go into a hostile environment where it's just you can sort of circle the wagons and, it's us against the world type of thing. And it's more fun with the us against the world mentality if like the world in question is like opposing fans and not your own fans. So I think it might be good for this team and for Dracovic to get there. Now, they know it's going to be crazy. I mean, we all know. I mean, we've been in these environments. We know what it's like at that stadium, just like it was at Acrisure Stadium last year. And so they're going to have to deal with that. They're going to have their communication down and silent counts and all of those things. But I think it'll be good for them to go on the road, stay in a hotel that, even though it's only in Washington, PA. Do you guys know that they stay in Washington? They don't.
I didn't know that.
Long trip, huh?
They do. They cut like an already short trip in half. I'm always like, especially for a night game, like why wouldn't you just drive down that day? But I guess they schedule it pretty well in advance, their hotels. But either way, even though it's only in Washington, PA, just go down there, get away from the noise in Pittsburgh. Go be like, the hated enemy and circle the wagons and just kind of, us against the world type of thing. And I think it might be good for Dracovic, and I think it might be good for this team.
Last one for me here, Chris, and we'll get you out of here. Thanks again for coming on. Just the feelings around Pittsburgh, with the Pitt fans, Pitt players, to have this game back on the schedule. And is this a game, Ren Baker, the AD here, has talked about this being an every year thing. He'd like to make this an every year thing if possible. Is that something you'd like to see as well?
Oh, without a doubt. And I think if you polled 100 Pitt fans, you'd get 99 of them saying, yeah, I want to do it too. And then one other guy who like misunderstood the question and clicked the box wrong. I mean, like, this is absolutely a game that should be played. And there's no question about it. And like Pitt fans will talk smack on West Virginia fans and back and forth. And that's great. That's part of the fun of it, but they all want the game to be played. it's a lot more fun when there are games being played than when they're just arguing with each other on Twitter. You know what I mean? Like that's not fun. That's annoying social media stuff. Actually playing the games is so much more fun. And I hope they are able to extend the series. It just feels like I sort of feel for these ADs who are trying to schedule games in the future when you don't know, like, oh, our conference might be playing 10 games, in 5 years, or 9 games in 5 years. You don't know what kind of scheduling slots you're going to have. Ideally, I mean, really, guys, these two teams should just be in the same conference again. It'd be far more interesting if they did that, and then we wouldn't have to worry about it.
Everybody's thinking that.
That would be fantastic, right? I mean, what is it? So is the Big 12 TV deal come up like at the end of the decade? Is that it, or we're coming up
31.
on it? So right.
Yeah,
so
31.
Just between now and then, find a way to get. I was actually talking with somebody about this the other day. Get like West Virginia, get Cincinnati, get. I don't even care. Kansas and UCF or somebody, just bring them into the ACC. We'll get some great basketball rivalries, you know what I mean, of Kansas and Duke. Because like screw Carolina and Florida State and Clemson. They want to leave, let them leave. And we'll get a brand new great basketball rivalry established. And Pitt and West Virginia can play all the time. Pitt and Cincinnati, because that's fun. And then everybody should have an opportunity to play UCF just to shut them up because they're annoying. So like it would be great to put this all together. And maybe even bring Houston too. Houston seems like an interesting place. So it would be great if that happens. I can't rule it out. I mean, it seems totally plausible. So maybe in the next few years we'll be doing this every year. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like college sports needs to go backwards to go forwards at some point. So
yeah, right.
I guess we'll figure out this concept where teams can play regionally. Yeah, it might make sense. Yeah. But thanks again, Chris. Really appreciate your thoughts, man. And look forward to seeing you at the game.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Have fun on Saturday night.
Thank you.
But yeah, a lot to digest there. Thanks again to Chris Peak from Panther Layer to come over and give us some of his thoughts on the game. Now, we'll go through a little bit of ours. Chris kind of touched on it from my perspective. When I look at this game, I think it comes down to, for West Virginia, can they run the football? Can they effectively throw the football downfield? They proved they could do it against Duquesne, but Duquesne's a different animal than Pittsburgh. And defensively, can West Virginia stop the run, and can West Virginia not give up open pass plays down the field? I think Neil hit the nail on the head this week. This team is going to go as far as their pass catchers offensively, and their defensive backs defensively will take them. I think that they've got to avoid these situations where guys are running free. It just cannot happen. It's one thing for that to happen against Penn State, seeing a scheme you haven't seen, maybe some rub routes, some crossing patterns. It's another thing to let Duquesne do that. And that's concerning. I think Neil addressed it, though, discussed, they've made some changes. They just didn't put them in. They don't want to show them on film. We'll see. I think this is a big game for West Virginia without, obviously, it might even be a bigger game for Neil Brown than it is for West Virginia, if that makes sense.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
I think this is a must-win. A must-win in terms of the fan base. I think even if West Virginia turns around and wins 8 games this year, this would still be a black eye because fans are sickened. I mean, to be truthful, obviously we're on the message board every day. I read it. Fans are very upset with how last year's game went. They felt that game was a win. They snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. So I think West Virginia's got to win this game, and I do think West Virginia gets it done. I think Pitt's going to be a big challenge. I think this is going to be a close game, but I got West Virginia winning this one. I think that they take care of business and add another notch to backyard brawl for the Mountaineers.
First of all, I want to say I do agree with you. This is a must win if you want to rally the fans. If you're Neil Brown, you need this game. You need this to really bring back the support, drum up that support that you really need to be successful. But there's a lot of unknowns for Pitt, and I think that goes in favor of West Virginia. West Virginia obviously had its unknowns, the Green in the passing game, and especially the defensive backs. They have to play tighter in coverage. They have to be more fundamental with how they break on the ball, and it's been poor on defense for sure. But there's a lot of unknowns coming in for Pitt, like Jurkovec, like Chris said. He's been awful. I mean, for lack of a better term, he's been bad for Pitt, and I think that goes in favor of West Virginia, especially if they're going to try new things, and they must do that in this game. So I think West Virginia takes it, and I also think a part of it is the home environment is going to really amp up the Mountaineers. You've seen it under Neil Brown that the home environment really is something that plays a factor in his team's performances. So when they've got the fans behind them in the biggest game of his career, I think they'll deliver. It's just going to come down to being able to run the football and to stop the pass, in my opinion.
I think this is probably going to be the biggest game in a decade in terms of environment. I would
Yeah,
put
definitely.
Oklahoma 2018 maybe the only game
And I was
that
at
I would
Oklahoma
compare.
2018, actually.
Yeah,
So
I would compare that maybe, but I think this is going to be more intense. I do. I mean, I know there was
yeah,
more on the line in that game, but this is Pitt, and Pitt brings out a lot of rowdy people, and I am absolutely very much looking forward to covering this game Saturday. Just kind of see
me
what
too.
the environment's like. It's West Virginia fans, their time to kind of, they've had a lot of talk about, we haven't got night games. We haven't got night games. Here's your night game at home against your by far the biggest rival on the schedule. Make it count, make it loud, and I do expect it will be that way. But going to be fun. We'll have coverage throughout the week, as always. I already got a bunch of stuff up on the site. We'll have more leading up to kickoff. Me and Zach will both be in the stands. Saturday, we'll have reaction, hopefully. Last week, sorry, I was a little under the weather. Did not want to tape the podcast after a 2-hour weather delay. But
That was
hopefully
rough,
hopefully we'll have some reaction right after the game as well to kind of get to you. And we'll have, of course, all of our written content. But thank you for tuning in again. This has been another fun-filled edition of Musings from the Mountains.